In this segment, we're going to add on our understanding of the previous segment, which talked about an introduction to the Greek noun system. In this segment, we're actually going to begin to look at not only how we understand Greek nouns according to case usage, which we introduced in the previous segment, but we're also going to move beyond that to talk about how we begin to recognize Greek nouns when they're in those particular cases. And so putting together the form with the conceptual framework is what we hope to do in this particular module. Once again, the particular dictum that I've been working on and working from in the last segment as well as this one is that when you're working with Greek nouns, it's the form of the Greek noun that will dictate how that noun is functioning in the sentence. In English, just by way of review, we determine how certain words function in a sentence by observing word order. But as we saw in Greek, word order can actually be used for emphasis. And we determine the function of certain words by the form or the case, or I might even say the clothing in which that word is found. In Greek, these are your 5 different cases. Your nominative case corresponds to the subject in English. Genitive case corresponds to the modifier in English. Dative case corresponds to the indirect object. The accusative case to the direct object. And then the vocative case corresponds to the direct address that we have in English. Now let's look particularly at Greek nouns. When we're dealing with Greek nouns, we're dealing with a word that is used as the name of a person, place, or a thing. Very basic, but good enough to get us started here. In Greek, nouns are going to be grouped into 3 different categories. And these 3 different categories are called declensions. Okay? The first, the second, and the third declension. We're not going to learn all of these together. You'll be happy to know. We're going to learn them in stages, and we're going to start with at least one of them today. But a declension is a grouping of nouns according to their endings. Okay, let's look at these 3 declensions just at least to set our sights on where we're going, and then we'll come back to really settle in one of those declensions today. There are 3 different declensions of nouns in the Greek system. You've got the first declension nouns. These are those nouns that have a characteristic alpha or eta in the ending that they place on the stem of the noun itself. Okay? An alpha or an eta is the distinctive for the first declension. And these first declension nouns are primarily feminine nouns, although there are some masculine. The good thing is there are no neuter nouns in the first declension. Talk more about that in a bit. The second declension, what we're going to deal with here in just a moment, are distinctive in the sense that its endings employ the omicron or the omega in those endings. And it just so happens that in the second declension, you have primarily masculine and neuter nouns with just a few feminine nouns. In the third declension, what is distinctive about it is that it involves a consonant at the end of the particular stem in which we're working with. I'll describe that much more in the next semester when we get to third declension nouns, but enough simply to point out the distinctive. And this one, the third declension, will include all 3 genders. And so this is pretty good in terms of a breakdown. When you're working with first declension nouns, all right, most of those are going to be feminine nouns. And they're going to have characteristic markers in their endings, the alpha and the eta. When you're working in the second declension, as we will in just a moment, they're going to be primarily masculine and neuter ones. Okay? And then having the distinctive markers of an omicron or an omega. And then next semester, we'll get into the wild word of third declension nouns. And we'll save at least discussion for those there, but they do include all 3 genders. Let's go a little bit deeper, especially with second declension nouns, which we'll focus upon in this segment. There are 2 main types of nouns in the second declension, and they are grouped by their respective genders. You've got a noun like theos, those that end in os ending in their nominative singular form. And they happen to be masculine in gender. Masculine in gender. Then you have those nouns like hieron. Don't forget that that is a rough breather on the front of that iota. Hieron is our pronunciation. Hieron is one of those nouns that ends in omicron nu ending in the nominative singular and is neuter in gender. All right? And so basically what I'm saying is we're going to have two different types of nouns in the second declension that we're really going to focus on. Masculine nouns that have an os ending in its nominative singular form, and neuter nouns like hieron that have an omicron nu in the nominative singular form. The os endings normally point you to masculine nouns. The on ending points you to neuter nouns. And as we get to there, we'll see that there are a few feminine nouns in the second declension, but in the second declension, these feminine nouns are going to take masculine endings. Although once you put an article on them, which we'll talk about later, that article will show its true feminine form. Okay? That's just an added piece of information. Put that out of your mind for the time being. Let's focus in here on masculine nouns and neuter nouns of the second declension. Kurios is a good noun to work with here. As a masculine noun, it's masculine in gender. It also functions within the second declension. Notice it has that os ending. All right. As you're identifying or declining a particular Greek noun like kurios, you're going to want to cut off its nominative singular ending, which is the os form, in order to find its stem. The stem of that noun is going to be kuri. All right? The os ending points you to the fact, its lexical form, that it is nominative and it is singular in its form. Okay? Os also points you to the fact that it's a masculine noun in the second declension. All right, let's take kurios now and break it down according to what it would look like as it moves throughout its different cases. Notice in the nominative case, the kuri stem adds os for the singular form. The nominative adds oi for the plural form. In the genitive, it adds u to the kuri stem, on for the plural. For the dative case in the singular, it adds an omega with an iota subscript in the singular. And then in the plural, an omicron e epsilon with an iota subscript and a sigma for its form. In the accusative, it adds the omicron nu ending or piece of clothing to the kuri stem in the singular. And in the plural, it adds the omicron upsilon sigma, us ending to the kuri stem for the plural. The last one is the vocative case. In the vocative case for the singular, it adds an epsilon. It's its characteristic ending for that noun. And then in the plural, oi. Notice how oi is the same as your nominative plural above. Once again, the nominative beginning to take over the usage of the vocative in the time period in which the New Testament was written. Thus, similar form, actually exact form. And that's good news because it cuts down on memorization. All right. As we look at these, I'm going to come back to this one. As we look at each of these, let's work through them. Basically, if you're working with a nominative singular form for the kuri stem, it's going to be kurios. Right? It's going to be singular and it's going to function as the subject of the sentence. If it's in the plural, kurioi. It's going to function as the subject of the sentence, but here it will be plural. In the genitive, functioning as a modifier. In the singular, kuriou. In the plural, kurion. In the dative, functioning as the indirect object, kurio. And in the plural, kuriois. The accusative, your direct object, it would be kurion in the singular, kurius in the plural. And then in your vocative, if these are functioning in the case of direct address, kurie in the singular, kurioi in the plural. If you find the kurioi form, then you're going to have to make a determination. In this sentence, is it functioning as the subject, or is it functioning as the beginning of direct address? And once you get into the process, you'll find that it's not really that hard to work out that issue. Like the Greek verbal system, I'm going to really encourage you simply to put these endings to memory. Remember, with the present active indicative, you memorized oase, ameneteusi. With the future active indicative, so se, saman sete susi. I'm going to ask you to do the same thing with masculine nouns in the second declension. Simply memorizing them according to case and number. Notice this. Os, u, o, on, oi, on, ois, us, oi. Over and over and in your mind, and over writing them down on pages. Put these things to memory so that you can begin to actively recall them and begin to recognize nouns of particularly masculine nouns of the second declension when you see them. Os, u, o, on, okay? As we move with the rest, you're oi, on, ois, us, and oi. Moving through each of the different cases respectively. Those are your masculine nouns in the second declension. Let's move now to those neuter nouns in the second declension, remembering once again that they have a characteristic omicron or omega in the ending or the clothing itself. We're going to go back to the word that we talked about a moment ago, hieron, the word for temple. Okay? Since it is a neuter noun, instead of having the os ending in the nominative singular, it will have the on ending in the nominative singular because it is neuter. But declining it is, for the most part, the same. Notice you have to start with its stem, knock off that nominative singular ending, the on, and you come to the hier stem. And it's on that stem that we will begin to build its endings. All right, so looking at this particular stem, in the nominative singular, hieron. In the nominative plural, hiera. In the genitive singular, hieru. In the plural, hieron. In the dative singular, hiero. In the plural, hierois. In the accusative singular, hieron. In the plural, hiera. In the vocative, hieron. In the singular and in the plural, hiera. Once again, those forms doing double duty for the neuter noun in the nominative case, but also notice in the accusative. A couple things that I want to point out here. First and foremost, notice the asterisk beside the genitive and the dative. The reason I asterisk this is because of something that you're going to like. Guess what? Once you have memorized the case endings for masculine nouns in the second declension, those beginning with os in the nominative singular, guess what? When you come to memorize those neuter nouns in the second declension, you're already going to know almost half. Because notice in the genitive and in the dative, the same endings occur. U for the genitive singular, on for the plural. In the dative, o for the dative singular, ois for the dative plural. That's exactly the same pattern that we saw in the preceding breakdown for masculine nouns in the second declension. So make note of that. Also, another thing that you will see that's typical of neuter nouns is that they have the same forms in both their nominative and accusative breakdowns and forms. Notice the nominative singular, hieron and hiera in the plural. That is the same for the accusative, hieron, hiera in the singular and plural of the accusative case. And it happens to be also the same for the vocative. All right? This will become clear once we start to actually work with neuter nouns, but you will have to begin to differentiate when you're working in a sentence. When you come across hieron or hiera, you'll have to ask yourself the question, is it functioning as the subject, as the direct object, or setting up direct address? All right? There will be clues in the sentence that will at least help you make that decision, so it won't be as hard as it may seem at the moment. And so we'll deal with that when we get there. But in learning these particular items of clothing, learn them in just the way we did with the masculine nouns, putting them to memory, starting with the nominative and moving through the vocative in the singular and the plural. On, u, o, on, A, on, ois, a, a. Okay? Now, you should be able to go back to handout number 4 that we worked on in the previous segment and actually work back through those endings. We worked with a noun from the noun angelos, meaning angel or messenger, and how it broke down. You ought to be able to go back to that now once you put these to memory and decline each of those forms of angelos according to its case, number, and gender. And you want to do that every time so you know exactly how that noun would function if and when it finds its place in a Greek sentence. Now, let's talk a little bit about translation here. I'm going to move through these rather quickly because you should be able to pick up on these things, particularly in Black's text, but I do want to accentuate a couple of points. When we're talking about nominatives, as you can expect, it's either going to be the subject of the sentence or it's going to function in a predicate nominative kind of construction. All right? When you're working with these kinds of things and you're working with translating it on the basis of the verb that you find in the sentence, you're going to want to make sure that the subject agrees with the verb. All right, look at what I'm talking about here. As we look at this particular example, ha'anthropos blepe theon. Ha'anthropos is nominative, it's masculine and it's singular. It's going to be the subject. All right. Blepe is present active indicative, third person singular. All right. If the subject is nominative singular, then it's going to need a singular verb, blepe being the third singular form. All right. Ha'anthropos in English normally is your third person singular form. So notice how it agrees with the third person singular form of blepe. Okay. Theon is from the noun theos. All right. That particular form is going to be your accusative, masculine singular form, therefore your direct object in the sentence. Okay? We would translate that as what? The man, I'm going to do it for you myself. The man sees God. Notice how that's different than the next example. Ha'anthropos, which is nominative singular. Blepo. Blepo, present active indicative, first person singular. What's the subject in blepo? It's not he, she, or it here, is it? It's I. And so notice that you do not have agreement. Therefore, ha'anthropos, regardless of the matter, would not be able to be the subject of blepo. It does not agree with the person and the number. Okay, so it would be a bogus example. Here's an exception. Neuter plural nouns, let me say it this way, when neuter nouns are found in the plural, this is the only exception where they can take singular verbs. And so when you're working through the exercises for this particular chapter in Black, and you come across a neuter plural form, keep in the back of your mind that it can, and normally does take, a singular verb. And so this will be the one place where you do not have agreement between the number of the subject and the number of the verb, okay? But no matter, you'll memorize it this way. And so when you come across it, you say, oh, that's a neuter noun, it's plural. Neuter nouns can take singular verbs, okay? So that shouldn't throw you off. All right, this is an example that actually we'll pull up here. Ta tekna comes from the noun teknon, okay? It's a neuter noun in the second declension. Ta tekna itself, all right, pointing to the fact that it's going to be in this case, nominative, and it's going to be plural. But blepe, present active indicative third singular, all right, is a third singular verb. So you've got a plural subject with a singular verb. Normally that doesn't work, but here it does, because ta tekna happens to be neuter, and neuter plurals can take a singular verb. Particular translation, the children see God. All right? Now, also, when you're dealing with the nominative case, you have to take into account the fact that you can have predicate nominative constructions. Remember in the segment where we talked about the present and future indicative, I also gave you the forms for the present indicative of the verb ami. Ami is a verb translated is or am or are. I am, you are, they are, he is. It's a verb that sets up a state. and it closely joins the subject with the direct object, or what in this construction we would call a predicate nominative. And it joins them in such a way that the subject is closely related, all right, to the predicate nominative, that which follows the verb. It's approximately the same as the subject. And there are specific verbs in Greek that do this. They're what we call equative verbs because they closely align the subject and the object, what we call the predicate nominative. Okay? Eimi is a classic verb in Greek that does just this, although you'll find huparko and ginomai to function in this fashion as well. Let's look at an example of this. Mark 1:11b is a great one. Su is the word for you. You ought to recognize a. All right, that's a present indicative form of eimi, isn't it? All right, it's the second person singular. You are, okay? And then notice, huios, son of, son in this case, followed by the modifier mu, and then followed by another nominative case, ha agapetos. As we work with this, what I'm really wanting to point out is that you're dealing here with eimi, the verb. And whenever you're dealing with the verb eimi, you're going to want to look for the setting up of a subject-predicate nominative construction. As we go back to the example, you'll see what I'm talking about here. Su is your subject here. It's the pronoun for you. It's followed by eimi, which is your equative verb. You are, and then notice huios. Huios is a masculine noun in the second declension. You would expect that to be a nominative. But it's in a place where you would expect the accusative. What's going on? Well, here, the reason it's not in the accusative, you are son, or in this case, you are my son, is because it's not the direct object here. It's the predicate nominative. It's closely aligned with the subject of the sentence. And in order to show you that close alignment, it puts both the subject and its object, its predicate nominative, in the same case. All right, make sense? Okay. Go back and read it in black and make sure you're clear on it and can recognize it. The full sentence, you are my son, the beloved one. Notice in this case, you and my son are close or even the same in terms of identification. Now, what about genitives? These are modifiers and possessors. The easy way to do this, moving from a Greek genitive case to English, is to either do it by use of an of or an apostrophe s. Notice the examples that I show here. The Son of God. Tu theou is in the genitive case here. And therefore you would say the Son of God, or you could say God's Son. In this particular instance, notice how God is in some way possessing the noun that it modifies. It qualifies it. It gives you further information as to how it relates to the head noun there. It's the Son of God, or it's God's Son. That's the way the genitive case functions. Many times the genitive case focuses on the issue of possession. Going back to Mark 1:11b that we just looked at, you are not just son, the beloved one, you are what? My son, the beloved one. Mu here is a personal pronoun, but it's in the genitive case. And therefore, it's going to modify and further bring out a quality that's associated with huios, son. It's not just you are a son, you are my son. That's how the genitive case functions. And in here, as it does in many cases, it functions in a way that shows possession. Okay? We also have what's called the attributive genitive, and I'm going to let you pick this up in future kinds of lectures. But just know that the genitive can do more than simply possess the noun that it modifies. It can also attribute a quality to it. The dative case is pretty straightforward. We're going to find out different ways that the dative case can at least project ideas and concepts. But here's the easiest way to pull it into view. Whenever you come across a dative case with a Greek noun, think of it in terms of a 2x4. Yeah, like a chunk of wood, a 2x4. But here, focusing to the way to translate it, either with a 2, a by, or a 4. The dative of indirect object is just simply with the 2. If you're wanting to talk about an issue of advantage, you use a for. If you want to talk about the means by which something is done, you do by. And the dative case can describe all three of those things and many others. But those are three of the most pertinent ones that we'll deal with, at least at this stage of the game. Notice our example from Mark 1:8. Right. I baptized you. Hudati is dative, it's nominative, and it's singular here. I baptized you, dative, water. Well, here, I baptized you by water. Or another use of the dative that I haven't shared you about might even push that, I baptize you with water. But he himself, autos de baptise, but he himself will baptize you in pneumati hagio. All right, pneumati hagio. That's also a dative case form, nominative singular. He will baptize you by means of or with the Holy Spirit. All right. So when you have these forms in the dative case, you're going to want to translate them with a to, a by, or a for. The one that makes the best sense within the context of the sentence and the paragraph in which you're working. How about the accusative case? Mark 1:2 is a good example of this. Ton angelon is your accusative form here. It's masculine. It's a singular. Notice, behold, I am sending my, and here's your accusative case, messenger before you. Accusative case corresponds to the direct object in English. Therefore, it's your direct object in the sentence, and when you render it into English, you put it after the verb. I am sending my messenger before you. All right, in addition to this, I won't show you an example of the vocative. You can pick that up in Black's text. You'll also want to pick up Black's discussion of conjunctions, okay? And then move on to work on the exercises for Black. I want you to do those exercises in a particular way, though, okay? First of all, I want you to attack the vocabulary, put it to memory, and once you feel comfortable with the vocabulary, begin to translate those exercise sentences. And this is the way I want you to break them down, okay? I'm going to give you an example here. I want you to write the sentences out. Now, of course, I give you a typed written form of them as I go ahead to explain those sentences, and you'll find those in your module folders. But regardless, I think it's very important for you to write those sentences out. Not only to get a good feel for writing these, but also just to put more and more of the senses involved in actually learning the Greek system itself. So write these sentences out. But also, once you've written them out, leave some space in between them. Both in between the words, but also in between the sentences, so that you can really begin to attack these. You can parse the verbs, you can decline the nouns, and you can put some markers in there that help you know how all of these things are functioning in the sentence. All right? Notice, with graphe, I would identify it as a present active indicative third singular form, from grapho. Doulos is a nominative masculine singular form, from doulos. All right? Namon is an accusative masculine singular form, from the noun namos. And hiero is a dative masculine singular form from the neuter noun hieron. Okay? You want to put that either below or right above each item of the sentence. And then you're going to want to go back and figure out how these things fit together in a coherent sentence. All right? All right, if you're working with each of these, notice that this is what it would look like. I want you to put the verb in brackets. I want you to do a 1 underline with the subject. I want you to do 2 underlines with the direct object. And I want you to do 3 underlines with the indirect object. If you come across a modifier, I want you to signify that with a dotted line with a directional arrow in the direction of the noun that it modifies. Okay? This is what it looks like. Graphe is your verb. Okay? Put it in and parse it so that you know how to translate it. Doulos, being your nominative form, okay, is going to be your subject. You've underlined it one time. You know where that goes when you go to translate it. Theou is your modifier because it's in the genitive case. It's going to modify doulos because it comes after it. Therefore, you know how to translate that. You know that namon is going to be your accusative direct object. So you know where to put that in your sentence. It's going to come after the verb. Then your dative, hiero, is going to be your indirect object. That's why you've underlined it 3 times over and against the twice underlining of the direct object so that you can keep these things clear. Once you have diagrammed it out in this kind of a fashion, you're able to then translate it in an English kind of sentence. A servant of God, all right, taking your nominative and your genitive together, placing it in the subject place. A servant of God is writing, that's your translation of your verb, according to the present tense. And he's writing a law, there's your direct object, to or for a temple. All right? A servant of God is writing a law to or for a temple. I'd like for you to attack each Greek sentence in this way because it will force you to both parse verbs, decline nouns, and begin to really understand how these things come together within the context of a sentence and how you make sense of them in order to translate them appropriately. All right? So I'm going to be looking for that diagramming as you turn those papers in just to make sure that you're working it all out. You have a good day, and we'll move on to the next module in the next segment.